Well, as if the LDP doesn't have enough to do with pulling the economy out of the fire, trying to get people to make more babies and standing up to China, it also wants to go reaching around in the cupboard of history, and it wants to try to change many of the common perceptions we have about what happened in the Second World War. One of the banner issues, if you like, of the historical revisionist movement, of course, is the Kono Statement. 1993, then Chief Cabinet Secretary Yohei Kono made this famous statement which acknowledged that the Japanese government had been involved in rounding up so-called comfort women, sex slaves in another euphemism, across Asia, mainly in Korea, for the military. That statement, of course, was highly unpopular within the LDP, and is sometimes forgotten that Kono-san rather was a member of the LDP. We have down here that the issuance of the Kono Statement needled many Japanese conservatives. It would probably be more accurate to say that it enraged them. They have spent the last 20 years really trying to get the LDP to reverse that statement. It looks as though under Prime Minister Abe they may have somebody who will see to their wishes, because he has a long record of saying he is unhappy with the Kono Statement and many other aspects of historical issues in Japan. We have three very distinguished speakers to talk about this issue today. They disagree quite fundamentally on many issues, so we should be glad that they've agreed to come and that they're not out in the middle of the floor slapping each other around. The first person is Kanji Nishio. He's Emeritus Professor at the University of Electric Communications. Nishio-san was one of the leading lights behind the historical textbook movement, which briefly ignited about 10 years ago and which still lingers. Kunio Suzuki, I've checked this with him. He's happy to be described as a Shin Uyoku, or a new right-winger. He is what we might call an intellectual right-winger, not one of those shaven-headed guys who goes around with the black bands. And Haruki Wada is Emeritus Professor at the University of Tokyo. He's also one of the key figures behind the Asian Women's Fund, which remains the only semi-government sponsored compensation fund for the comfort women. What we're going to do is we're going to take Suzuki-san first, then Nishio-san, and then Wada-san, in that order. They're going to make statements, probably about 10 minutes each. Usually when we say 10 minutes, it's closer to 20, but we hope they will try to keep to those times, and then we'll take plenty of questions. I'm sure there'll be lots. Can I remind you please to switch off your mobile phone if you haven't already done so. Thank you very much. Suzuki-sensei, on it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Nishio-sensei?
アメリカ合衆国は2007年7月会議において慰安婦問題決議を行い、この事件を20世紀の最悪の事件の一つと規定し、今年に入ってニューヨーク州議会上院、ニュージャージー州議会会議において同様の議決を行いました。それは私に言わせれば誠に許しがたい希望であっているようにございます。
In July of 2007, the House of Representatives of the United States Congress passed a resolution concerning comfort women. In the resolution, this was described as one of the largest cases of human trafficking in the 20th century. And further, the upper house or Senate of the state of New York and the lower house of the state of New Jersey passed similar resolutions. If I may comment, I think these are unforgivable and slanderous acts, very, very alarming to me.
慰安婦と呼ばれる人たちは当時いました。世界には貧困のために不幸にして自分の生を売らなければならなかった人たちはいました。しかし日本が国家として権力を使って強制的に女性たちに生を売らせたという事実はありません。ましてや20万人に近い若い女性が拉致され、トラックに積まれて戦地に運ばれたなどという事実は相当無形で、どこを探しても証拠は出てこないのです。
Yes, in the past there were people who were called comfort women. In fact, whenever you look at the world, you see that throughout history, when because of different terrible reasons such as poverty, there have always been people who have been forced to sell their sex because they must. However, when we look back at the records, there is absolutely no factual evidence that shows that the Japanese state, the Japanese government, used its power and authority to force women to sell their bodies for sex. Going further, the idea that 200,000, nearly 200,000 women were abducted, put into trucks, and forcibly sent to the war zones is absolutely absurd, and there's no proof to prove such things.
もし当時の朝鮮でそういう事件が起これば、当然朝鮮人の中から暴動が起こったでしょう。しかも当時の朝鮮の警察官の8割までが朝鮮人でした。最初の嘘が積み重なって日本政府の弁解のまずさもあり、誤解の輪を広げました。どのような嘘から始まり、どのようなプロセスをたどったかは後ほど質問があればお話します。アメリカ議会はどうかこのことをしっかり再調査して各決議を撤回していただきたいと思います。
If something had happened on the Korean Peninsula, 200,000 women being abducted in this way, if that had actually happened, there should have been tremendous riots. I would also like to point out to you that the police on the peninsula were basically made up 80% composed of, the police were composed 80% of Koreans. As a result, we have these non-truths, these falsehoods. Falsehoods have been piled onto falsehoods, and they have been confounded by the fact that the Japanese response, the Japanese government response, have not always been quite good. In regard to the actual historical events, in regard to how these misinformation became more widely known and more widely accepted, if you would like to ask during the question and answer session, I'd be more than happy to provide you with details. But what I would like to say here is that I strongly urge the U.S. Congress to reopen investigations into this matter. And as a result, I would ask that these resolutions be retracted.
そもそもアメリカに、あるいは世界各国に戦争と性の問題で日本を非難する資格はありません。元都立大教授で東洋大学長の磯村栄一さんは敗戦の年渋谷区長をしていました。アメリカ軍司令部 GHQ の将校から呼ばれて占領軍の兵士のために女性を集めろと命令され、レクリエーションセンターと名付けられた施設を作らされました。当時市民の中には食べ物もなく、チョコレート1枚で体を売るような女性の話も広がっていました。磯村さんは慰安婦問題が当時国際的話題になるにつれ、辛くて自分が日本人を米軍兵士の自由にされる境地に追いやった恥を告発せずにはいられないと懺悔しております。産経新聞94年9月17日。
I would also like to point out that neither the United States nor in fact any country of the world, I believe, has the right, the moral right to criticize or condemn Japan. When we talk about the idea of war and sex, I would like to refer you to an article that appeared in 1994, September 17th, in the Sankei Shimbun, Sankei newspaper. The article featured the words of a man named Mr. Eiichi Isomura. He was a former professor of Tokyo Metropolitan University. He was also the former president of Toyo University. And at the end of the war, he was in a position at the head of Shibuya Ward. And he received an order to meet with the newly arrived GHQ General Headquarters or Occupation Forces. He was asked to meet with an official, and the official told him, instructed him to assemble women to basically take care of the occupation forces. He was asked to create facilities, and the English name for them were recreation centers. He was, of course, quite surprised to hear this request, but this was a time when citizens basically had nothing to eat, and people were willing to sell themselves for a bar of chocolate. he therefore followed the instructions and assembled these women. However, over time, when Mr. Isomura began to hear about the comfort women issue and it became an international topic, he remembered what he himself had participated in after the war, and he thought back to what he had done, basically forcing or pressuring women to, in his own country, to sell themselves to be used by occupation force soldiers freely. He felt tremendous shame, and he could not keep from confessing what he had done.
穏健な良識派で知られる日本芸術院長の三浦志門先生は、軍隊と性という問題と取り上げるなら、戦後の米軍が憲兵と日本の警察を動員して一定街路を封鎖して全ての女性の性病検査を行ったこと、その際娼婦でない女性が巻き込まれたこと、レイプもあったことをぜひ書いてほしい。事件のほとんどは闇から闇に葬られた。産経新聞1996年8月2日です。パンパンとかオンリーという名で呼ばれた日本人慰安婦が派手な衣装と化粧でアメリカ兵にぶら下がって歩いていた風俗はつい昨日の光景であります。私はいかに少年時代にそれを目に焼き付いて覚えているか。その日本人女性の数は20万人であります。これは米軍による日本人慰安婦です。
Another person that I would like to quote is a man named Mr. Shumon Miura. He was the former head of the Japan Art Academy. He is a person very well respected for his moderate views and his very sound judgment. He wrote in an article, again in the Sankei newspaper in 1996, August 2nd. He said, if we're going to talk about sex and the military, I would like to refer you to the post-war situation in Japan. He said that there were times, this was a time when the U.S. military basically instructed the Japanese police forces, the Japanese military police forces, to close off certain sections of the city and grab any woman there and test them for venereal diseases. During these roundups, there were many women who were not official prostitutes or not professional prostitutes who were rounded up as well, and they were raped. And these things should, he said, be written about as well. Instead, all of these truths have been put into the shadow and into the shade, and nothing has come out. But this was a time when these women were called pom-poms in Japanese, or they would also be called onlys. And they would be basically Japanese comfort women who wore flashy clothes and flashy makeup. They would always be hanging on the arms of American soldiers. Those scenes could be seen everywhere in Japan at that time, and it feels as though it was only yesterday that I saw them as a child. I know that these were American forces comfort women, and they numbered some 200,000 people.
リベラルという雑誌があり、若い女性が特殊慰安施設に連れて行かれて初めての日に処女を破られ、1日最低15人からの戦場から来たアメリカ兵の相手をさせられ、腰を抜かし別人のようになった様が手記として残っています。どこの部屋からも叫び声と笑い声と女たちのおえつが聞こえてきました。2、3ヶ月の間に病気になったり気が違ったりしました。これは何年にもわたって日本の全土にわたって行われたことの縮図だったのです。これは1954年戦争が終わってから9年後のこの雑誌の11月号です。
I would also like to refer to another article. This is from a magazine at that time called Liberal, and it reports the different experiences of women who were comfort women, basically young girls who were brought to these special facilities and confined. On the first day there, their virginity was forcibly taken away from them. They were forced to serve American soldiers and officers a minimum of 15 men per day. The article spoke about their terrified feelings and how their personalities changed overnight. It talked about the fact that when you walked down the halls, you could hear from different rooms screaming and laughter, different voices of many, many women. Many women became ill after a few months. Many became quite deranged. This was an article that appeared in November of 1954, more than 9 years after the end of the war. However, this kind of situation continued throughout Japan for many, many years after the war.
日本を今告発するアメリカ議会、キリスト教諸団体等は、あなた方の父や兄が何をしていたかを知り、恥を知れと申し上げたい。
I would like to say very strongly that the people of the U.S. Congress, the people who belong to different Christian organizations who are now denouncing Japan, I would like to ask you to look at what your fathers and your brothers have done in the past, and I would like for you to feel shame.
日本政府はアメリカに謝罪と賠償を要求するべきであります。
I feel very strongly that the Japanese government should demand an apology and compensation from the U.S. government.
もしそれができない、また政府にはそのつもりがないというのであれば、日本政府は慰安婦問題についていかなる謝罪も賠償もすべきではありません。国際関係は皆何よりも相互性と公平を必要とします。
If the United States will not respond in this way, if the U.S. has no intention of doing such a thing, then I think the Japanese government should not move toward extending apologies or compensations in any form. Because, after all, international relations are built on the idea of mutuality, on fair and equitable treatment.
アメリカは日米戦争において自国の正義を守るために日本を残虐非道の国であったとしておきたいのです。さもないと原爆や東京大空襲をした歴史上の犯罪を正当化することができないからです。
The United States has a need to portray its role in the U.S.-Japan war as being good and a fighter against evil. In other words, it has a need to portray Japan during World War II as an incredibly cruel and immoral nation. This is the only way that the United States can justify its own crimes against humanity. In other words, the dropping of the atomic bombs and the terrible Tokyo air raids.
2007年以降のいくつものアメリカ議会の慰安婦決議は今まで親米的であった日本人、戦後アメリカの反共政策に協力してきた日本の武士階層、例えば私もその一人でありますが、その人たちを苦しめ、苛立たせています。
As I mentioned, there have been various resolutions that have been passed in the United States since 2007. However, I think these resolutions are going to very much endanger the positive feelings that Japanese people have had for the United States over the years. They are also going to inspire negative feelings among the Japanese conservatives, myself included, who have long cooperated with the United States in fighting the battle against communism.
このままアメリカが事態を解消しなければ、無実の罪を負わされて傷つけられた日本人の感情は内向化し、鬱屈し、反米的方向へ走り出す可能性があります。
If corrections are not taken, if corrections are not made, I believe that for the Japanese people, the feelings that they have suffered quite often, people who had no guilt have had to suffer over the years, these feelings of negativism will rise and inspire feelings of anti-US.
一番いけないのは日本をホロコーストを犯したナチスの国ドイツと同列に並べて裁こうとするために慰安婦問題を大きく誇大に描き出すことです。
I think the biggest mistake that's been made in the past is that because of this need to portray Japan in a very, very negative light, they have, in order to pass judgment on Japan, they've had to make the comfort women issue on the same level as the Holocaust. In other words, equate Japan with Germany.
ここに重要なドイツ語文献、おそらくドイツですらも忘れられている重要な文献、フランツ・ザイドラー、売春、同性愛、自己毀損、ドイツ衛生指導の諸問題1939年から45年という本の表紙の目次を持ってきました。完璧な国家売春を行っていたのはドイツなんです。
I would like to bring to your attention this document. It represents the cover of a book that was published in Germany during the Nazi era. I'm sure many Germans have forgotten about this book also, but it was written by a man named Mr. Franz Seidler, and the English title is Prostitution, Homosexuality, and Masturbation, Problems of the German Medical Service in 1939 to 1945. It was, after all, the Nazis that had state-sponsored, perfectly perfected state prostitution.
ナチ管理下の売春では人種問題が難しく、ドイツ人士官がユダヤ人女性と性交を交わせば 死刑でした。
Prostitution under Nazi control was very, very difficult to control. For officers of the military or for party officials to have sex with a Jewish woman would mean that they would incur the death penalty.
あらゆる点で西欧と東欧ではやり方が異なり、西欧のオランダやノルウェーなどでは交渉制度が施設として利用され、ポーランドやソ連などでは交渉制度が存在しないので、ドイツの前線司令官は半ば強制措置で売春婦になる少女たちをかき集めました。
I would also like to point out that even when we talk about Europe, there were differences between Western Europe and Eastern Europe. In countries in Western Europe, such as Holland and Norway, there were already state-regulated or licensed prostitution systems in place. So the Nazis were basically able to use pre-existing brothels. In Eastern Europe, however, for example, in Poland and Russia or the USSR, there was no system of licensed prostitution. So officers at the forefront basically had to forcibly assemble women to serve in these
それでもドイツの慰安婦問題が話題にならなかったのはなぜかといえば、それ以外のナチスの犯罪があまりにも巨大で、そのために慰安婦問題は影が霞んでしまったのです。
You may therefore ask, why then isn't the comfort women issue or the prostitution issue of the Nazis more focused upon? Why isn't it brought to light and debated? The reason is very, very clear. It's because the other crimes that the Nazis perpetrated were much huger and more terrible in scale, that the comfort women issue has become a much smaller one in comparison.
韓国はベトナム戦争に参戦し、7000人から2万人の死生児を残しています。
I would also like to point out that South Korea took part in the Vietnam War. It is said that some 7,000 to 20,000 illegitimate children of South Korean soldiers now still remain in Vietnam.
最後に一つのエピソードを申し上げて終わりにします。戦争中、中国雲南省の最前線でアメリカ軍に追い詰められた日本の部隊は、体内にいた朝鮮人慰安婦をお前たちは生きて帰れとアメリカ軍に引き渡し、アメリカ軍の方に返し、残っていた日本人以外は慰安婦は兵隊さんと共に自決して玉砕しました。日本の兵士たちは武士道で戦っていたんです。
In regard to this topic, I would just like to leave you with one last example. This was something that occurred during the last days of World War II. There was in Yunnan province in China a group of soldiers who were being pursued by the U.S. forces. Realizing that they had no hopes of escape, they told the comfort woman, the Korean comfort woman who had been traveling with them, to go and save their lives. In other words, they turned them over to the U.S. forces. The Japanese comfort woman and the Japanese forces then continued on and eventually committed suicide. In other words, the spirit of Bushido did exist even during World War II.
和田先生。